Essay number 3 and 4. The Liberty of Doctrine, a Propos of the Gumbel case. Academic chairs are many, but wise and noble teachers are few. Lecture rooms are numerous and large, but the number of young people who genuinely thirst after truth and justice is small. Nature scatters her common wares with a lavish hand, but the choice sought she produces but seldom. We all know that, so why complain? Was it not ever thus, and will it not ever thus remain? Certainly, and one must take what nature gives as one finds it. But there is also such a thing as the spirit of the times, an attitude of mind characteristic of a particular generation, which is passed on from individual to individual and gives a society its particular tone. Each of us has to do his little bit towards transforming the spirit of the times. Compare the spirit which animated the youth in our universities 100 years ago with that prevailing today. They had faith in the amelioration of human society, respect for every honest opinion, the tolerance for which our classics had lived and fought. In those days, men strove for a larger political unity, which at that time was called Germany. It was the students and the teachers at the universities who kept these ideals alive. Today also, there is an urge towards social progress, towards tolerance and freedom of thought, towards a larger political unity, which we today call Europe. But the students at our universities have ceased as completely as their teachers to enshrine the hopes and ideals of the nation. Anyone who looks at our times coolly and dispassionately must admit this. We are assembled today to take stock of ourselves. The external reason for this meeting is the Gumbel case. This apostle of justice has written about unexpiated political crimes with devoted industry, high courage, and exemplary fairness, and has done the community a signal service by his books. And this is the man whom the students and the good many of the staff of his university are today doing their best to expel. Political passion cannot be allowed to go to such lengths. I am convinced that every man who reads Herr Gumbel's books with an open mind will get the same impression from them as I have. Men like him are needed if we are ever to build up a healthy political society. Let every man judge according to his own standards, by what he has himself read, not by what others tell him. If that happens, this Gumbel case, after an unedifying beginning, may still do good. Essay number 5 and 6. Good and Evil and the True Value of a Human Being. It is right in principle that those should be the best loved who have contributed most to the elevation of the human race and human life. But if one goes on to ask who they are, one finds oneself in no inconsiderable difficulties. In the case of political and even of religious leaders, it is often very doubtful whether they have done more good or harm. Hence, I most seriously believe that one does people the best service by giving them some elevating work to do and thus indirectly elevating them. This applies most of all to the great artist, but also in a lesser degree to the scientist. To be sure, it is not the fruits of scientific research that elevate a man and enrich his nature, but the urge to understand the intellectual work, creative or receptive. It would surely be absurd to judge the value of the Talmud, for instance, by its intellectual fruits. The true value of a human being is determined primarily by the measure and the sense in which he has attained to liberation from the self. Essay number 7. Society and Personality. When we survey our lives and endeavors, we soon observe that almost the whole of our actions and desires are bound up with the existence of other human beings. We see that our whole nature resembles that of the social animals. We eat food that others have grown, wear clothes that others have made, live in houses that others have built. The greater part of our knowledge and beliefs has been communicated to us by other people through the medium of a language which others have created. Without language, our mental capabilities would be poor indeed, comparable to those of the higher animals. We have therefore to admit that we owe our principal advantage over the beasts to the fact of living in human society. The individual, if left alone from birth, would remain primitive and beast-like in his thoughts and feelings to a degree that we can hardly conceive. The individual is what he is and has a significance that he has not so much in virtue of his individuality, but rather as a member of a great human society which directs his material and spiritual existence from the cradle to the grave. A man's value to the community depends primarily on how far his feelings, thoughts, and actions are directed towards promoting the good of his fellows. We call him good or bad according to how he stands in this matter. It looks at first sight as if our estimate of a man depended entirely on his social qualities. And yet, such an attitude would be wrong. It is clear that all the valuable things, material, spiritual, and moral, which we receive from society can be traced back through countless generations to certain creative individuals. The use of fire, the cultivation of edible plants, the steam engine, each was discovered by one man. Only the individual can think and thereby create new values for society, and even set up new moral standards to which the life of the community conforms. Without creative, independently thinking and judging personalities, the upward development of society is as unthinkable as the development of the individual personality without the nourishing soil of the community. The health of society thus depends quite as much on the independence of individuals composing it as on their close political coercion. It has been said very justly that Grasso-Europeo-American culture as a whole, and in particular its brilliant flowering in the Italian Renaissance, which put an end to the stagnation of medieval Europe, is based on the liberation and comparative isolation of the individual. Let us now consider the times in which we live. How does society fare? How the individual? The population of the civilized countries is extremely dense as compared with former times. Europe today contains about 3 times as many people as it did 100 years ago. But the number of great men has decreased out of all proportion. Only a few individuals are known to the masses as personalities through their creative achievements. Organization has, to some extent, taken the place of the great man, particularly in the technical sphere, but also to a very perceptive extent in the scientific. The lack of outstanding figures is particularly striking in the domain of art. Painting and music have definitely degenerated and largely lost their popular appeal. In politics, not only are leaders lacking, but the independence of spent and the sense of justice of the citizen have to a great extent declined. The democratic parliamentarian regime, which is based on such independence, has in many places been shaken. Dictatorships have sprung up and are tolerated because men's sense of the dignity and the rights of the individual is no longer strong enough. In 2 weeks, the sheep-like masses can be worked up by the newspapers into such a state of excited fury that the men are prepared to put on uniform and kill and be built, for the sake of the worthless aims of a few interested parties. Compulsory military service seems to me the most disgraceful symptom of that deficiency in personal dignity from which civilized mankind is suffering today. No wonder there is no lack of prophets who prophesy the early eclipse of our civilization. I'm not one of these pessimists. I believe that better times are coming. Let me shortly state my reasons for such confidence. In my opinion, the present symptoms of decadence are explained by the fact that the development of industry and machinery has made the struggle for existence very much more severe, greatly to the detriment of the free development of the individual. But the development of machinery means that less and less work is needed from the individual for the satisfaction of the community's needs. A planned division of labor is becoming more and more of a crying necessity, and this division will lead to the material security of the individual. This security and the spare time and energy which the individual will have at his command can be made to further his development. In this way, the community may regain its health, and we will hope that future historians will explain the morbid symptoms of the present-day society as the childhood ailments of an aspiring humanity, due entirely to the excessive speed at which civilization was advancing.